Reasons and amendments on the Renters' Rights Bill, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage.
My Lords, I beg to move that the Commons' reasons and amendments be now considered.
The question is that the Commons' reasons and amendments be now considered. As many as that opinion will say content, the contrary not content, the contents have it. Motion A, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage.
My Lords, I beg to move motion A that this House do not insist on its Amendment 11, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 11A. With the leave of the House, I will also speak to motions E, F, G, G1 and L, which are grouped together. My Lords, it's a great pleasure to bring the Renters' Rights Bill back to the House of Lords to consider the amendments and reasons from the other place. I would like to start by thanking my colleague in the other place, the Housing Minister, for setting out the Government's position on the amendments agreed by your Lordships. As he outlined, the Government made a clear manifesto commitment to the people to modernise the insecure and unjust private rented sector. The Renters' Rights Bill delivers on this promise by empowering private renters with more rights, protection and greater security of tenure. I would like to thank the Noble Lords, Lord de Clifford, Lord Keane of Ely and the Noble Baroness, Lady Grenda, for their amendments in this group. Beginning with the Noble Lord, Lord de Clifford's amendment in lieu, Amendment 11B, which would allow landlords to require an additional deposit equivalent to 1 to 3 weeks' rent as a condition of their consent to a tenant's request to keep a pet. A requirement for a further 3 weeks' deposit would cost the average tenant in England over £900. This is unaffordable for most tenants and would greatly exceed the average deposit deduction for pet damage of £300. While I truly appreciate that the Noble Lord, Lord de Clifford, has considered these affordability issues to a degree in his amendment in lieu, by stating the additional deposit may be from 1 to 3 weeks at the landlord's reasonable discretion, I'm afraid that we still cannot accept this amendment. In practice, this provision would be effectively the same as allowing landlords to request up to 3 weeks' deposit, as the original amendment did. Many landlords, of course, will charge the full amount, giving rise to the same affordability challenges as the original amendment. As outlined at Lord's report, the Government has existing powers under the Tenant Fees Act 2019, which will allow Parliament to require a larger deposit where a landlord has consented to the tenant having a pet. We will continue to keep this position under review following royal assent. And if there is clear evidence that pet damage is exceeding normal tenancy deposits, we do have the Tenant Fees Act power, which would allow us to remedy this. Turning now to Lord's Amendment 39D, tabled by the Noble Baroness Lady Grenda, introducing an annual reporting requirement on the quality of military accommodation. I would like to express my very grateful thanks to the Noble Baronesses Lady Grenda and Lady Thornhill for their continued engagement on this issue. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the Noble and Gallant Lord, Lord Stirrup, for his tireless advocacy for service personnel and their families. I'm sure the whole House will agree that our armed service personnel and their families must live in safe and decent homes. The Government acknowledges the vital role that accommodation plays in their lives. We are determined to ensure that our personnel have access to safe, high-quality accommodation that meets their needs and reflects the importance of their service to our nation. As I've previously outlined, the Government is committed to driving up the standards of military accommodation further. Earlier this year, the Ministry of Defence announced an additional £1.5 billion investment in service family accommodation over the next 5 years, above the committed. And later this year, the Government will publish a defence housing strategy, setting out clear renewal standards and further steps to improve the lived experience of our personnel. I welcome the amendment in lieu tabled by the Noble Baroness, and I can confirm that the Government supports this approach in principle. We have therefore tabled Amendments 39B and 39C as amendments in lieu, which will introduce a statutory requirement for annual reporting on the extent to which service family accommodation meets the Decent Home Standard. This amendment will place on a statutory basis the commitments the Housing Minister made in the other place for greater transparency and accountability on the quality of military accommodation. Alongside the government's wider actions that I've already highlighted, this will make a real difference in ensuring that service personnel and their families have the homes of the quality they deserve. I have discussed the government's amendment in lieu with the Noble Baronesses Lady Thornhill and Lady Grender, and with Gideon Amos MP, who I'm grateful for his strong advocacy on this issue in the other place. They've indicated their support, and I hope Noble Lords will also support this amendment. Finally, turning to Lords Amendment 26 and 27, which were tabled by the Noble Lord, Lord Keane of Ely, and would require local authorities to meet the criminal rather than civil standard of proof when imposing penalties for rental discrimination and rental bidding breaches. I'm very grateful to the Noble Lord, Lord Keane, for his constructive engagement on this issue. We believe that local authorities will enforce these measures against the relevant standard of proof effectively. However, we understand the concerns from Noble Lords that if this is not the case, there is a risk of an unsatisfactory decision. With that in mind, I can confirm the Government will include in the relevant statutory guidance to local authorities advice that a local authority exercises a quasi-judicial function when imposing a civil penalty and should therefore be satisfied by credible, reliable and sufficient documentary or other evidence on the balance of probabilities that a person has breached a relevant requirement before imposing a penalty. Moreover, the bill already gives a person against whom a local authority proposes to impose a penalty a right to make representations before a final decision is made, as well as a right to an appeal by way of rehearing against a penalty. I am pleased to have come to an agreement with the Noble Lord, Lord Keane of Ely, on this issue. I hope this is sufficient to address the concerns of Noble Lords, and they will agree to the motion not to insist from the other place.
The question is that motion A be agreed to. Motion A1, Lord de Clifford.
Lords, I beg to move motion A1 as an amendment to motion A as inserted, and do propose amendment 11B in lieu. My Lords, firstly may I thank the Noble Baroness, the Minister, for her opening remarks. Firstly, please note my interest in the register that I work for, and I'm also a shareholder in a veterinary business that cares for many pets, and also have the privilege of being a dog owner for many years. My updated amendment seeks to provide protection and reassurance to landlords and give tenants much more opportunity to find a rentable property that allow pets. The Government quite rightly included in this bill the right of tenants to request landlords to allow pets, as currently there is a limited number of properties available. The Government commencement of the bill wished to support landlords with a change with regards to the financial risk that pets may cause damage to a property during a tenancy. This proposed solution was an insurance policy which provided a level of cover. This proposal was supported by many housing and pet charities. Due to the risk profile of this type of cover, the insurance market could not provide the appropriate policies. As a result, the Government withdrew this proposal from the bill. That risk still exists. The tenant's 5 weeks deposit covers the risk tenants may cause damage to a property. Housing a pet is therefore an additional risk, and therefore asking for an extra amount of deposit is surely not unreasonable. One of the Government's objections to the amendment is that it, as already stated by the Noble Baroness, the Minister, was the increase in the deposit of rent, and I acknowledge that this does exist for some. Therefore, we have considered this in an updating and reducing the number of weeks deposit required as a minimum 1 week, and also an obligation on landlords to be reasonable when asking for the amount of deposit considered and the nature of the pet or number of pets. The Government also said that the 5-week deposit will cover the damage of pets. They use figures from the University of Huddersfield survey provided to the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home, saying 76% of landlords have no issue with pets. That leaves 24% of landlords with pet issues. That is not a small number. The summary does not define what those pet issues are. The report did quote that the average cost of a related pet damage was about £300 per tenancy. I believe the average weekly rent is about £300, as mentioned in the passage of this bill. So 1 week's rent would cover the damage. It may be that a pet damages a property, a good tenant will repair it. Sadly, not all tenants are the same, so just like we have a range of good and bad landlords. So if a tenant does have a pet that does cause some damage and is not repaired, is it not likely that if there are other repairs, they will not be repaired? That is what the 5-week deposit will cover, and an additional pet deposit could cover the pet damage. There is good evidence that tenants with pets tend to stay longer, and many do take care of their properties to a high standard. One conclusion would be that these tenants do stay in certain properties for longer due to the lack of supply of alternative rented property, which happily this bill wishes to address. But we need to support landlords with this change. By supporting this amendment, we will be supporting landlords and make the process of more landlords accepting pets without objection, far greater reality, so as that they have the protection of an additional deposit. It will hopefully also encourage existing landlords to stay in the private rental sector market and potentially new landlords to choose long-term tenancies over short-term holiday and Airbnb lets, and so maintaining supply of rental properties. A table in the University of Huddington report asked landlords whether different policies or incentives would encourage them to consider pet owners as a tenant in the future. 53% said having a tenant with insurance cover for a pet damage would help. Sadly, this is not available. 51% said allowing landlords to charge for a deep clean would help. This would be covered by a pet deposit. 43% said allowing landlords to be allowed to hold a pet would help them, and this is what this amendment does. Pets provide so much to us human beings in terms of companionship, health benefits, and providing friendship and support at difficult times. When owning a pet, we have a responsibility to maintain their welfare and health. This is both a time commitment as well as a financial commitment for the owners. Therefore, if someone is a possible tenant with a pet, an additional deposit for a property should be thought of as part of that financial commitment. I hope my revised amendment will hopefully find some support with your lordships today, and we can find a balance between landlords and tenants to increase the supply of pet-friendly accommodation. I beg to move.
The original question was that motion A be agreed to. Since when motion A1 has been moved as an amendment to motion A, and at the end insert the words printed on the Marshall list. The question, therefore, is that motion A1 be agreed to.
My Lords, I rise in particular to welcome Amendments 39B and C on behalf of myself and our most able leader on this bill team, my noble friend Baroness Thornhill. We are absolutely delighted that military housing is going to be held to the same legal standard as the private renters in this bill. Putting this on a statutory footing fulfills the campaigning, the wishes of this government and the campaigning work by some of my colleagues, particularly in the Commons MPs, Gideon Amos and Helen Morgan, to name but a few. And I would like particularly to thank Adam Bull in our Whip's office, who's been working very hard on this over the recess. In particular, I want to thank the noble lady, the Minister, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage, for her time and patience in discussing this issue and in us getting to this very happy mutual agreement. And also Minister Pennicook for the time that he spared, and the noble Lord Coker as well, who has spent time on this. The noble Lords Best and Stirrup have provided wisdom, backing and advice, and I am grateful to both of them for this as well. At the heart of this issue are those who give the ultimate sacrifice in the military and the families who live with them and stand by them. Let us hope, as a result of this change, that the appalling conditions that they have endured so far will change and will be a thing of the past. And we are enormously grateful for this change and looking forward to seeing it introduced. With regard to the noble Lord Clifford, we have consistently not supported this, although we do recognise the eloquence of his argument on this area. But we continue to argue that this will place undue financial pressure on tenants and could be exploited by rogue landlords to impose excessive deposit charges. We believe that tenants and owner-occupiers and social tenants should be viewed on a much more equal footing, and this speaks to some of the speeches that both the noble lady Thornhill and I have made on that, and therefore we feel we cannot support that. But in particular, we're absolutely delighted with the amendment by the government, and we look forward to its implementation.
Yeah. My Lords, I would like to speak to Amendment 11B in the name of the Noble Lord, Lord de Clifford, which, as we've heard, seeks to allow landlords to request a pet deposit equivalent to up to 3 weeks of rent. Like many of the charities involved in the animal welfare sector who have campaigned tirelessly on this issue, I'm disappointed we're having to return to this subject after it was clearly rejected in the other place and has been the subject of intense discussion. Charities including Battersea, Cats Protection and the Dogs Trust strongly support the government's position, and so do I. The reason for that is clear. Such an obligation would defeat the very purpose of the pet provisions in this carefully balanced bill, which are designed to make pet ownership easier for tenants and remove the iniquity that owning a pet is the preserve of the increasingly small number of people who can afford to own their own home. And I declare my own interest as the owner of a cat. And let us be clear, as I said at committee, for tenants seeking to have a single pet in rented accommodation, there is likely to be only very minimal, if any, damage, and the standard security deposit is more than sufficient to cover any damage beyond standard wear and tear, as a survey conducted by YouGov on behalf of the Dogs Trust and Cats Protection in 2021 concluded. And in rare circumstances, my Lords, where damage caused by a pet may exceed the value of the existing security deposit, measures already exist for landlords to seek additional compensation from the tenant. As such, charging an additional pet deposit is unnecessarily and wholly disproportionate. And this costly proposal would put the wonderful aspiration of pet ownership beyond the reach of many, my Lords. Allowing landlords to require a pet deposit equivalent to up to 3 weeks' rent could see tenants forced to find up to an additional £1,500 for a one-bedroom flat in high-rent areas such as London, a figure which is unaffordable for many. It would also introduce an unfair geographical disparity, with those living in cities where rents are higher being far worse off compared to those living in rural areas. Another problem, my Lords, with the addition of a pet deposit is the potential lack of transparency regarding what a landlord decides should constitute pet damage and what constitutes the type of damage would otherwise be funded by the standard security deposit. Many landlords, I fear, would see this as an extra fund to provide an option to withhold more money simply for standard wear and tear. My Lords, the pet provisions in this bill have been thoroughly and energetically debated both inside and outside this House. It's clear from all those discussions that the standard security deposit is more than adequate to cover any damage caused by a pet, and that this amendment is completely unnecessary. Its only result would be to neuter one of the key planks of this vital legislation, destroying the hopes of so many tenants who dream of having a pet in their home. Today, my Lords, we should make that dream a reality, and I'm afraid if the noble Lord moves his amendments, I shall be voting against it.
My Lords, I will speak briefly on two matters. First of all, the Ministry of Defence accommodation and the pet deposits. Firstly, on the Ministry of Defence housing, we thank the Government for listening and engaging so constructively on this issue. The concerns raised have been recognised, and the Government's response has been both proportionate and pragmatic. On these benches, as ever, we strongly support our service personnel and the vital contribution they make to us and our country, and we are happy to support the Government's motion. My Lords, turning to the issue of pets, and I rise to support the noble Lord, Lord de Clifford, on an issue that's filled my inbox and I know that of my noble friend Lord Jameson's as well. When the bill was first introduced, the government rightly sought to balance the cost of pet-related damage through the requirement of pet insurance. But as we pointed out repeatedly, and as the noble Earl, Lord Kinnoul, emphasised, no such insurance product was actually existing. Once the government accepted that fact, the requirement was removed, but nothing, my lords, was put in its place. This amendment restores that missing balance. It offers a fair and proportionate settlement, ensuring renters can keep pets in their homes, while landlords have a reassurance that any pet-related damage can be covered, and if there is no damage, it will be returned. Research by Property Mark recently shows that 85.3% of landlords and agents have incurred damage to their properties by pets. Yet more staggeringly, my lords, 57% of landlords and agents report being unable to recoup pet-related damage costs. Allowing an additional deposit of 1 to 3 weeks' rent is therefore, we believe, a reasonable and balanced step, one that protects tenants' rights while recognising the realities faced by landlords, particularly small landlords. My lords, landlords are not always wealthy investors. Many, as we've said many times in this bill, are ordinary people for whom second property represents their pensions or their life savings. If a property requires major cleaning or repair, those costs can be prohibitive, and in some cases, my lords, could drive properties out of the rental market altogether. So therefore, my lords, if the noble Lord de Clifford chooses to test the opinion of the House, once again we on these benches will support him. Finally, my lords, I just wanted to thank the government for their constructive engagement and for the assurances given, both in writing and from the dispatch box, on the standard of proof. Those commitments provide a much-needed clarity and reassurance on how this will be applied in practice, and we are grateful for the Minister's response on these. My Lords, taken together, these measures improve, we believe, the bill, make it fairer, more workable and more balanced for both tenants and landlords alike.
My Lords, I thank all noble Lords who have spoken in this section of the debate, and I thank again the noble Lord de Clifford and Baroness Grinder for their very positive approaches throughout the course of the bill. And can I thank the noble Lord Black for his support? I'll come on to some of the points that he raised in a moment, and Baroness Scott. I do think the responses to this part of the debate this afternoon are pragmatic. We can't accept Lord de Clifford's amendment, I'm afraid. He did question about the government's we didn't question, he mentioned the government's change in position on pet insurance. We did have an extensive debate both in your Lordship's house and in the other place, and we did draw on the expertise of peers such as the noble Lord the Earl of Kinnoul, Lord de Clifford and Lord Trees. And the government consulted further with the Association of British Insurers and the British Insurance Brokers Association, and it was following that engagement that we concluded that we were no longer confident the insurance and underwriting sector would have sufficient or suitable products available for either landlords or tenants to purchase. In view of that, we didn't want to leave tenants in a position whereby they couldn't comply with conditions set as part of the pet consent granted by their landlord, as that would mean they weren't able to have a pet, and that would defeat the object of having pet provisions within the bill. I'm pleased to say that, as the noble Lord Black mentioned, Battersea Cats and Dogs Home have indicated their support for the government's approach, including the approach of not accepting this amendment. And I received just today a letter of very strong support from the Dogs Trust and the Cats Protection League, and another email from Shelter expressing their support and hoping that this amendment would not be accepted because they didn't feel that it's in the interest of tenants or of their pets. We did use the information from the University of Huddersfield as part of our consideration, but I think it's important to say that as I noted in my opening speech, we will continue to keep this under review, and we do have the powers to allow for higher deposits for pets if needed. And we are satisfied at the moment that the existing requirement for 5 weeks deposit for typical tenancies is sufficient to cover the risk of any increased damage by pet ownership. And I know some landlords are concerned about potential damage that may be caused by pets. Landlords can deduct damage costs from the normal tenancy deposit, as they do now. And in rare cases, for example, where the deposit didn't cover the cost of the damage, the landlord could take the tenant to the small claims court and bring a money claim to recoup any outstanding amounts in line with the wider rules in the sector. We don't want to put tenants in a position where they can't have a pet because there are no suitable insurance products available or because they can't afford the additional cost of a deposit. So we will keep this matter under review, and I hope the noble lord will consider withdrawing his amendment.
I thank your lordships for your thoughts and speeches, and also I'm pleased and support Baroness Grender's change on an amendment of being accepted by the government. And you haven't changed your position on your support of this, and I understand so that comments regarding the deposit scheme. Referring to Lord Black of Brentwood, I'm just as passionate about allowing more people to have pets, and what I'm trying to do with this amendment is to try and encourage landlords not to leave the sector by having pets. I would like more people to have pets, and I realise how important it is, but I do think there's a balance to be struck here with this trying to reassure landlords, because they don't accept pets at the present time. There are very few properties that are on the market for, and this is trying to create a balance between that. And I appreciate there are some tenants who will struggle to find that deposit, but I believe by having this in place, more landlords will be willing to accept pets, and there will be less disruption between landlords and tenants when they ask to have that pets. And on the basis of that, I would like to test the opinion on the House on my motion.
The question is that motion A1 be agreed to. As many as that opinion will say content. Contrary, not content?
Not content.
I think the not contents have it.
Not content.
Right, the question will then be decided by a division. I will inform the House when opening the voting. Voting is now open. Clear the bar.